The sun hung low over Valnaris, casting a golden glow across the dense forests and rocky cliffs that framed the military base. Cadet Kael Drayton squinted out the transport window, watching the distant horizon blur into the orange and green streaks of the alien landscape. The planet was eerily beautiful, untamed and rugged, much like the reputation of the unit stationed here. The elite soldiers, the ones who had made this planet their battlefield, weren't what Kael had signed up for. "Ready for your first taste of real combat, Drayton?" Corporal Zane's voice cut through the silence, a mocking grin on his face. Kael glanced at him, his mouth dry. "Not really, sir. I'm more of a systems guy." Zane chuckled, nudging him in the ribs. "Systems guy, huh? Well, we'll see how that works when you're face to face with a Trogath. Hope your systems can help you run fast." Kael didn't respond. He had heard the stories. The Trogath were predators, massive, intelligent, and practically unstoppable. No one who encountered them survived. Kael's job wasn't combat. It never had been. His skills were in communication, data analysis, and tech. The Academy had shoved him into this mission for some reason he couldn't quite figure out. The transport lurched as it began its descent, the rumbling of engines vibrating through Kael's body. He adjusted his uniform, a slightly too large military jumpsuit, and wiped his palms on his legs. The fear gnawing at his stomach wasn't helped by the stories of soldiers who had vanished on Valnaris. No one had ever returned from an encounter with the Trogath. "Don't worry, Cadet. You'll be fine." Zane's tone was less playful now, though the grin never left his face. "Just stay out of the way and keep your eyes open. Follow the orders, and you'll survive." The transport's hatch swung open with a hiss, and the cadets disembarked onto the cold, rocky ground of the base. Kael swallowed hard. The military base was much quieter than he had expected. The air smelled like iron and dust, and the quiet tension in the air made Kael's pulse quicken. A tall, wiry officer in a black uniform approached, her boots crunching against the gravel. "Cadet Drayton," she said, her sharp gaze scanning him up and down. "Glad to see you're still alive. For now." Yes, ma'am," Kael replied, unsure of how to respond. He hadn't expected to be addressed directly so soon. "I'm Commander Lorne," she continued, her voice colder than the planet's surface. "You'll be assigned to the tech division. No combat for you, just communications and surveillance. But that could change quickly, depending on the situation." She turned, leading him toward the command center. "And let me make this clear, Cadet, this is no ordinary assignment. You'll be on the front lines, whether you're trained or not." "Understood, ma'am," Kael said, though the words tasted foreign on his tongue. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't a fighter. He was a thinker, a strategist, a data analyzer. He wasn't supposed to face an apex predator with his hands shaking and his mind running on overdrive. The command center was bustling when they arrived. Officers moved quickly between terminals, relaying information to one another in urgent tones. Kael was led to a small cubicle tucked in the corner, away from the action. A half-broken console sat in front of him, its screen flickering intermittently. "You'll be handling communications," Lorne said, her gaze scanning the room. "Relay transmissions, scan for any unauthorized signals, monitor systems. Keep your head down and stay alert. You don't want to be the one who misses something important." Kael nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. He could hear the distant chatter of soldiers outside, their boots echoing in the empty halls. They were the ones who would face the Trogath. Not him. He was just a kid playing pretend. Hours passed, and Kael's nerves began to settle as he worked. He hacked into various communication systems, made minor adjustments to security protocols, and ran diagnostics on the local surveillance network. It was mundane work, but at least it was familiar. He tried not to listen to the stories that filtered through the walls, stories about the Trogath's savagery, about the unrelenting monsters that had wiped out entire squads. The stories felt distant, detached, like they belonged to another reality, one that Kael had no part in. But that sense of detachment shattered when the sirens blared. A deafening alarm filled the command center, followed by the frantic shouts of officers scrambling for action. Commander Lorne's face tightened, her sharp eyes flashing with urgency. "Get to the emergency protocols, Drayton. Now." Kael's pulse spiked. His training had never prepared him for this moment. He'd never been taught how to respond to an attack by an apex predator. His fingers flew over the console, pulling up defense systems, activating shields, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding around him. "Commander, we've got reports of Trogath activity in the northern sector," an officer shouted across the room. "Multiple squads down, no survivors. The Trogath they're coming." The cold sweat on Kael's forehead only thickened. "What do we do?" he blurted, his voice breaking through the static of his own panic. Lorne's expression softened for a moment, but there was no time for sympathy. "We fight. You get those communication systems back online. Keep us connected, Drayton. We need to know where they are. We need to track them." "Why yes, ma'am," Kael stammered, trying to regain control of his hands. His mind raced, running through every protocol he'd ever studied. This wasn't a drill. The Trogath weren't a training exercise. He activated the comm systems, the data streams flowing faster than his brain could process. But then, another explosion. The whole base trembled as the force rattled the walls. A faint scream echoed through the corridors, quickly muffled by the sound of collapsing structures. Kael's hands went cold. The predator was here. "Cadet!" Lorne's voice snapped him out of his stupor. "We need eyes on the outer perimeter. Now!" Kael's breath quickened. There was no time left. This wasn't the training ground. This was real. This was survival. He grabbed the comlink device, and with a trembling voice, he patched into the military's last hope for coordination. The Trogath were hunting them, and Kael was the only one who could stop them, or at least buy them some time. The base was crumbling. The Trogath had arrived. Kael didn't have a weapon. He didn't have the training. But somehow, he had a chance, if only he could figure out how to use it. Kael had never been in a firefight. He had read about them in textbooks, watched simulations, and studied the tactics of great military leaders. But this was different. The chaos was real. The screams, the heavy blasts of gunfire, and the rumbling of the base collapsing around him all felt too close. Too immediate. He crouched beside the command center's main console, staring at the flickering map of the outer perimeter. The data was incomplete, corrupted by the Trogath's interference, but he could still see the glowing red dots, squadrons of soldiers being decimated, one by one. His hands trembled as he adjusted the radar, scanning for any signs of the predator's movement. "Drayton, we need you up here." Lorne's voice crackled through the comlink, tight with tension. "Now." Kael didn't hesitate. He grabbed his headset and sprinted toward the center of the command room, where Lorne stood with her arms crossed, glaring at the screens. The flickering images of soldiers falling and bases being overrun were replaced by red, pulsing warnings. "What's the status, ma'am?" Kael asked, forcing the panic out of his voice. "We're losing communication with the outer sectors," Lorne said, her voice cold. "The Trogath are methodical. They're shutting us down one section at a time. We need to figure out how they're doing it, and fast." Kael's mind raced. If the Trogath were attacking the base's communication systems, then that meant they had a pattern. They were smart, intelligent hunters. Maybe too intelligent. He ran his fingers over the console's interface, quickly bypassing the security protocols to get access to the sensor grid. "I think I found something," Kael muttered, his brow furrowing. "The Trogath aren't just attacking randomly. They're targeting our relay stations. They know exactly where to hit. It's like they've been studying us." Lorne stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "Are you telling me they've been watching us?" "Could be," Kael said, pulling up an old reconnaissance map from the archives. The Trogath were apex predators, and predators studied their prey. He scrolled through old reports, noting the patterns of attacks that had been recorded from previous encounters. There were no records of Trogath attacks that had been this methodical, this precise. Look, here's the pattern. They're not just hunting us, they're hunting our systems. Lorne's gaze shifted from Kael's screen to the data flowing in front of her. Her expression hardened, a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. So what now? We can't fight them head-on. Our best chance is to trap them, use their intelligence against them, Kael said, already thinking ahead. If they're using our communications to track us, then they must have some way of masking their own movements. If we can disrupt their signals. Lorne nodded sharply. I'll get the field teams moving to secure the outer perimeter. You focus on jamming their communications. Kael didn't need further orders. He turned back to the console, fingers flying over the interface, inputting commands and rerouting signals. He accessed the base's surveillance satellites and began cross-referencing the Trogath's movements. He found a cluster of unexplained disruptions in the surveillance data, small gaps in the radar feeds, places where the Trogath's presence seemed to vanish, as if they were cloaking themselves. "Ma'am, I think I've got it," Kael said, his voice tinged with excitement. "They're masking their signals with local interference, smart, but not perfect. There's a brief lag in their cloaking mechanism. If we can create a stronger signal pulse at the right frequency, we can force their cloak to drop." Lorne was already giving orders over the comlink, mobilizing the remaining teams. "We'll have to move quickly. We only have one shot at this." "What do you need, Drayton?" Kael's heart pounded in his chest. The plan was risky. If they failed, they would be sitting ducks for the Trogath. But it was the only chance they had. "I need access to the central reactor. If we can overload the power grid and send a pulse strong enough to disrupt their cloaking devices, we can at least buy some time." Lorne stared at him for a moment, as though assessing his plan. Then, with a quick nod, she spoke into her mic. "All right, Drayton. You have 30 minutes. Move fast." Kael grabbed his gear and headed for the main reactor room. The halls of the command center were eerily quiet now, the sounds of battle distant but unmistakable. A few cadets were scattered around, working feverishly at their consoles, but the rest of the soldiers were either dead or out on the front lines. He ran through the darkened corridors, the dim emergency lights casting long shadows on the walls. He could hear the occasional hiss of the air filtration system, but other than that, it was deathly still. Kael's breath quickened with each step. He had never felt this vulnerable, this exposed. But there was no turning back. When he reached the reactor room, Kael quickly accessed the control panel. The screen blinked a red warning at him, power levels were unstable, and several systems were offline. He'd need to reroute power manually to get the pulse strong enough. His fingers hesitated over the console for a split second. There was no margin for error. One wrong move, and they would lose everything. With a deep breath, Kael began inputting the override codes, manually adjusting the power flow. The reactor hummed to life, its energy levels spiking as the pulse began to form. Kael checked the time. 15 minutes left. The whine of the reactor's engines grew louder as Kael's pulse quickened. He could feel the sweat on his brow, his breath short in his chest. He had no idea if the pulse would work, but he had to believe it would. He had to. The screen flashed green, indicating that the pulse was ready. "Ma'am, it's done," Kael said, his voice barely above a whisper as he spoke into his comlink. "Good work, Drayton," Lorne replied, her voice tight but grateful. "Now get back to the command center. We've got one chance to turn this around." Kael nodded, but before he could move, the base shook violently. A roar, a guttural, bone-rattling sound, ripped through the walls. The Trogath were close. He didn't hesitate. He ran. The roar of the Trogath echoed through the crumbling walls of the command center, a bone-chilling reminder that survival was no longer a choice, it was a race against time. The pulse Kael had triggered had disrupted the Trogath's cloaking mechanism, but that also meant the Predator was now fully aware of their presence. There would be no hiding, no second chances. The fight for Valnaris had begun, and the Trogath was coming. Kael sprinted through the darkened halls of the command center, the weight of his gear pressing down on him, each step taking him closer to the heart of the storm. The lights flickered intermittently, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and twist at the edges of his vision. He could hear the muffled sounds of gunfire and the distant thuds of explosions, but he couldn't afford to focus on anything but the mission. Lorne's voice crackled through his comlink, sharp and urgent. "Drayton, where are you?" "On my way, ma'am." 10 minutes out, Kael responded, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of something crashing nearby made him jump. A soldier appeared in the doorway ahead of him, covered in dirt and sweat, his face smeared with blood. "Cadet! Get out of here, it's too dangerous." Kael didn't slow down. "The Trogath is already on us." "I'm not running." His voice was steady, though his hands trembled slightly. He had no choice but to keep moving forward. The soldier hesitated, his eyes wide with fear, but Kael pushed past him, running through the dark hallways until he reached the central command room. Lorne stood at the helm, her face grim as she scanned the monitors, the lines of stress deepening around her eyes. She didn't look at Kael when he entered, her focus was entirely on the data in front of her. "Did it work?" she asked without turning. Kael stepped forward, locking eyes with her. "The pulse worked. The Trogath is vulnerable." "Then let's finish this," she said, her voice hard, determined. Kael looked at the central console, where the map of the base's defenses was displayed. The Trogath was no longer a shadow on the outskirts, it was closing in. A blinking red dot on the map showed its position, just outside the gates. A line of defense remained, but it wouldn't hold long. "We need a distraction," Kael said quickly, scanning the map for weak points. "Something that'll draw it out, away from the other squads." Lorne's eyes flicked to the screen, and she nodded. "You have an idea?" "We use its arrogance against it," Kael said, his voice steady with the clarity of the plan. "It's hunting us for sport. If we create a scenario where it believes it can easily take us down, we can lure it into the open. We bait it into a kill zone." Lorne's gaze sharpened. "I'm listening." Kael quickly began typing into the console, pulling up data on the Trogath's previous hunting patterns. He had studied the creature's behavior for hours during the brief moments of downtime, looking for any clue, any hint that might give him an edge. The Trogath wasn't just a killing machine, it was a strategist. It hunted for sport, not out of necessity, and that arrogance could be its undoing. We need to create the illusion of a weak point, an area where it thinks it can strike with minimal resistance. I'll make it look like the eastern perimeter is completely undefended. We'll draw it in and trap it there. Lorne glanced at the map and gave a terse nod. "Do it. But you need to get to the outer turret, there's no time to waste." Kael didn't hesitate. "I'll handle it." The outer perimeter was eerily quiet when Kael arrived, the sounds of the battle behind him muted as he made his way to the nearest turret. His breath came in ragged gasps, but there was no time to be tired. The Trogath would be on them soon. He reached the control panel, his hands steady as he activated the turret's long-range targeting system. The crosshairs blinked to life on the screen, locking onto the position where the Trogath was likely to appear. Then, he waited. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to do something, anything, but he held his ground, focusing on the signal that would set everything into motion. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The air around him was thick with the promise of violence. Finally, a shape appeared on the far horizon, dark, hulking, and unmistakably alien. The Trogath. It was moving with a deliberate slowness, clearly aware of the trap it was about to spring. Kael's pulse quickened, but he didn't falter. He activated the signal. In the command center, Lorne's voice rang out. "It's taken the bait. Now move." Kael's finger hovered over the turret's fire button. The Trogath was close, so close now that he could see its massive form stalking toward the empty perimeter. It was getting cocky, its movements slow and calculating, sure that it had won. Kael exhaled, pressing the button. The turret fired. The first blast missed, but only by inches. The Trogath stopped, its head jerking toward the source of the attack, its keen senses locking onto Kael's position. It was angry now, its patience gone. Kael's hands flew across the controls, rapidly firing again. This time, the blast connected, striking the creature's side. The Trogath roared in pain, but its attention was fully locked on Kael. It charged. Kael's heart was in his throat. He wasn't sure how much time he had left, but he knew he couldn't miss again. The creature was fast, too fast. Its movements were a blur of muscle and rage as it closed the distance, its enormous claws ready to strike. But Kael had planned for this. He hit the final button on the console, activating a series of electromagnetic pulses that locked down the terrain. The Trogath's advance was halted by a hidden net of high-tension cables, a temporary trap designed to slow it down. It worked. The creature snarled, struggling against the cables, giving Kael the precious seconds he needed to activate the final step of his plan. The ground beneath them shook as Kael fired one last shot from the turret, hitting the Trogath square in the chest. The creature roared, disoriented, then collapsed to the ground, its massive form twitching as it took its final breath. Kael's hands shook, his body drained, but he could feel the victory settle into his bones. The Trogath was dead. Lorne's voice echoed through his comlink, thick with disbelief and respect. "You did it. We actually did it." Kael leaned against the console, closing his eyes for a moment. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. They had survived, but only just. And Kael had learned something in the process. He had learned that even the greatest predators could be outsmarted. Even the most relentless hunters had weaknesses. And sometimes, the greatest weapon was not strength, but the mind. Ask ChatGPT.